Hello there. If you like truth, you'll like it here. Welcome. Why baby mama makers and broken home creators are the worst menace to society. Full disclosure, let me tell you the story of Damon. Damon met Tasha when they were in high school. At the time, he was also seeing Liza, but Tasha didn't know that. Damon was her first love, and she fell hard. Liza and Tasha caught wind of each other as word spread that they were both seeing Damon. So they did what many women do in this situation. They began competing with each other to get and keep Damon's attention. Both girls were really smart and went to the same school known for its low acceptance rate. In other words, its difficulty getting in, and its excellent arts and humanities program. But both girls began focusing more on Damon than their studies. When Tasha saw Liza show up to school in a short skirt and her hair freshly done, she made it a point the next day to wear her skirt even shorter and do something extra special to her hair. This type of silly competition went on for months. At one point, although Tasha had wanted to wait until prom night to lose her virginity, she wound up having sex with Damon earlier because she didn't want Liza to get to him first. Well, Liza slept with him too. And both girls kept up a steady competition for Damon's affections and attention for many more months. Then, Liza's father found out that she had been seeing and sleeping with Damon and put an end to their relationship. When he found that Liza had continued sneaking around with Damon, he unenrolled her from the school they shared and moved her across town to a private school. Liza was devastated and wouldn't talk to her dad for months. Meanwhile, Tasha was ecstatic, because she had won and had Damon all to herself. Tasha had him to herself for about 2 months. That is, until Kiara started at their school. Kiara was the total opposite of Tasha. Kiara was worldly and had lived many places, whereas Tasha had never even left their city. Tasha wasn't surprised when Damon took to Kiara, and even when he continued seeing her after he graduated. Damon was a couple years older than Tasha and Kiara, who were the same age, and both women continued to see Damon throughout their high school years. Tasha had always wanted to be a nurse when she graduated, but more than anything, she wanted to be with Damon. So, needless to say, she was devastated when she found out that Damon had gotten Kiara pregnant in their 12th grade year, and they were expecting a son. News spread around their high school like wildfire, and Tasha was devastated. She watched Kiara's belly grow bigger and bigger and would cry herself to sleep at night. She totally stopped focusing on her studies and felt like her life was ending. The only thing that made her feel better was the fact that Damon was still seeing her too. Tasha was scared but excited when, a few months after Kiara's pregnancy news began circulating around the school, Tasha learned that she was pregnant too. By then, Kiara had dropped out of the school because she couldn't keep up with its strenuous arts and humanities program, and Tasha didn't know what was going on with her and her pregnancy. She was later dismayed to learn that Kiara had had her son the September after she would have graduated from their school, and Tasha had her daughter that December after graduation, so the children were 3 months apart. Because Tasha was pregnant after graduation, she had decided to postpone nursing school, but would look into it again after she had the baby. Fast forward 5 years, and Tasha had not gone to nursing school, but she'd had one more child with Damon. By now, she knew that Damon and Kiara had broken up for good, but she also knew that they were still sleeping together, because Kiara would blast it on social media whenever they'd have a falling out. Still, Tasha felt like she'd won because she and Damon had 2 children together and were a family, whereas Kiara only had one with him, and they never seemed to get along. Tasha eventually found a job working in an office building and began saving up for an apartment for herself and her 2 children. At the time, she and her kids were still living in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house. Fast forward 5 years, and Tasha had had another child with Damon. 6 months after her 3rd child was born, she learned that Kiara had also recently given birth to her 2nd child with Damon. Tasha was angry, but she swore she would not let Kiara win. So she held on to Damon and onto their family. She hated sharing him with Kiara, especially because he and Kiara never even got along well. but she also didn't want to break up with him and destroy their family. Various times throughout the year, she and Damon had even gotten apartments together, and he'd never had an apartment with Kiara. So Tasha felt like it was only a matter of time before he was ready to commit to her fully and make them a real family. About a year after Tasha had had her third child with Damon, and Kiara had had her second, Damon met Riley and fell head over heels in love with her. He began to take her around his family, and even officially broke up with Tasha, claiming he no longer wanted to see her and wanted to be a faithful man to Riley. Kiara didn't seem to really care, and had walked away easily, but Tasha was devastated. She had been with Damon since high school, and did not want a life that did not include him, so she wasn't willing to give up easily. Every time he came around to see the children, she made sure to give him a little something to remind him of what she had to offer, and the fact that he was always willing to take it, despite claiming he was in a relationship with Riley, showed Tasha that he still had feelings for her, and this was all the hope she needed. Riley was different than Tasha and Kiara. Kiara had dropped out of the Arts and Humanities high school she'd gone to when she'd become pregnant, and had never re-enrolled in another high school. She had decided to instead finish her GED so she could quickly enter the workforce. Kiara worked at various stores in the mall, and sometimes 2 jobs at a time, so she could afford an apartment for her and her 2 children, because Damon very rarely, if ever, helped out financially. And whenever she tried to put him on child support, he would just quit his job and find a different gig that could pay him under the table. Tasha had managed to finish high school, but had never gone to nursing school. She had, however, been working at that office job she'd had since high school for a long time, and she felt like it was her career. No, it wasn't nursing, and it didn't pay a whole lot, resulting in her having to move in with her parents from time to time, but it allowed her to take care of her kids, which she often had to do on her own, because Damon did not like having to pay child support. He told her because he was an involved father, he shouldn't have to. And it was true. He did pick up their kids and take them to the park sometimes. And he would buy them shoes and some clothing items when school started. But Tasha secretly felt like that wasn't enough. She needed help with bills and groceries, and she desperately wanted a stable home to put their kids in, and not have to keep moving in with her parents in their little 3-bedroom house. But every time she brought this up to Damon, he would get upset and accuse her of being ungrateful. Then he'd run back to Riley. So she had learned to keep those things to herself and make do on her own with her office job and occasional help from her parents. But Riley had a career. Riley had finished college and went on to get a master's degree. She was certified in her field and made good money. She owned her own home and often held it over Tasha's head that she had more than her, and that Tasha couldn't compete. Although Tasha held her own when they argued, she was still affected by Riley's words, especially because they seemed true. Riley had had her own house that she owned and had a real career that was making her real money, and Tasha didn't feel like she could compare. She was especially devastated when Damon moved in with Riley, and she found out that they were expecting their first child. After the birth of Damon and Riley's first child, Damon continued sleeping with Tasha, and occasionally with Kiara too. When Riley found out, she put Damon out of her home and broke up with him, but she took him back. This went on for 3 years, until Riley got tired of all the back and forth between her and Tasha, and occasionally Kiara. And it didn't help that Damon wasn't helping her support their child. Sure, she made enough money to do it alone, but doing it alone was not what she had signed up for. And she definitely never thought she would be just a baby mama. Her parents had been so disappointed in her when they found out that she was pregnant by Damon. Riley had sworn to never be like his other baby mamas, but she found herself in their same boat. Just like his other baby mamas, she was now a single mom, unmarried, left supporting her child on her own, having to forever deal with a man who would never be faithful to her, nor fully present in their child's life. I mean, he had so many other children, 3 with Tasha, 2 with Kiara, and now 1 with Riley, so 6 altogether at this point, that it was impossible for her child to ever have enough time with their dad. So Riley had had enough. When Riley broke up with Damon, he responded by asking her to marry him, which Riley accepted. A year into their engagement, Riley learned that Tasha was pregnant with their fourth child, Damon's seventh in total, and she left Damon for good. When she filed paperwork for Damon to pay child support for their child, Damon simply quit his job and started a side hustle so that his income would not be reported to the government. Riley spent the next few years navigating being a single parent and trying to figure out ways to determine Damon's income so she could get child support. A few years after getting Tasha pregnant with her fourth child, Damon's seventh in total, Damon bought his first house at the age of 44 and moved into it with a 24-year-old nurse named Nicole. At the time he bought his home, Kiara was still in an apartment with one of her children, with her other child being an adult and having moved into their own place with their own child. Tasha was still living in one bedroom at her parents' 3-bedroom house. She lived in that bedroom with 2 of her children, with the other 2 having moved into their own apartment with their own children, and her other 2 children being younger were still at home. And yes, both Kiara and Tasha were already grandparents, having had their children in high school, and then their children having had their children also in high school. Riley still had her career and still owned her own home, but now she was a single mom, navigating raising her child on her own with limited help from her child's father, and almost none of that help being financial. And in case anyone was wondering, as for Liza, who was seeing Damon in high school along with Tasha, and likely would have been yet another woman impregnated by him and her life ruined, she went on to become a corporate attorney with 2 law practices in 2 different states. She is married to a fellow attorney, and they have 2 children. I would love to say that this is a made-up story, but it isn't. It is a real story. Damon is a real man who has really created 3 individual broken homes with a total of 7 children who never got to experience what it was like to have their mom and their dad in the same home raising them. These children's lives were full of chaos and confusion and drama as Damon jumped from woman to woman and bed to bed, leaving children and misery in his wake. Instead of a promising nursing career and a man who would love and commit to only her, Tasha had an office job where she was surrounded by people half her age and still living in her childhood bedroom. She had never even rented a home, let alone knew what it felt like to own one. Both of Tasha's oldest 2 children had either gotten pregnant or gotten someone pregnant in high school, making Tasha a grandmother in her 30s, and making her children likely to follow in her footsteps. The generational curse of poverty and limited opportunities was passed down from Tasha to her children, courtesy of her involvement with Damon. Kiara had also only lived in apartments. She had worked in malls for much of her life, until she eventually got certified to work in a hospital. She liked her job now, and liked working in the hospital, but had always wondered what life would have been like if she'd taken a different path, a path away from Damon. She had been a silly teenage girl who liked a boy and had made some mistakes. She had not known that she'd still be paying for those mistakes almost 30 years later. Like Tasha, her oldest child had become a teen parent, and she too was a grandmother before her time. She had tried to stress to her child the value of education, but despite all of her warnings, her child had made the same mistakes that she had, and there wasn't anything she'd been able to do about it. She wished she'd been a better example for her child, and that she'd lived her life differently, so that her child wouldn't be in the same boat she'd been in. Riley became like the other 2 baby mamas. She used to arrogantly feel like she was better than them, because she'd gone to school and finished 2 degrees. But at the end of the day, she had realized that she had fallen for the same foolishness they had fallen for too. She had been humbled by life, and by taking up with a deadbeat like Damon. Her dad had always been involved in her life, and always been a significant influence in her life, but her child would not have that. At a minimum, her child would always have to share their time and their dad's resources with 6 other children. She knew she was in a better place financially than the other baby mamas, but at the end of the day, her kid would still be a kid without a father in the home and in his life. Damon and others like him, others like martellholt, are running around wreaking havoc on whole communities, by impregnating woman after woman and leaving a smorgasbord of broken homes, women, and children in their wake. But this is what happens when men create broken homes. Broken children are often a result, as are, sometimes, broken women. Too many women will never get to know the feeling of coming home to a husband that is the father of their children, because these men are running around using their penises as weapons of mass cultural destruction. And when I talk about these broken homes, children, and women, I am including women like Letitia, who are still in broken homes, even when the men come home. I'm talking about men like Marcel, who use their homes as a place to bird bath between dipping into other women and other women's homes. Men who don't care about their children, nor their children's mothers, who stay in marriages out of convenience or because, as Johnny Taylor sang, it's cheaper to keep her. I'm talking about real marriages with real men who really put their wife and children first. Letitia is a married woman and she doesn't know this feeling either, but that's because she's married on paper only. She is not, in my opinion, emotionally nor intellectually connected to her husband, or even, I believe, spiritually connected. Her husband is just the man she makes bacon for in the mornings, and then sees some evenings in between his jaunts to Africa and wherever else he wants to go, with whomever he wants to go there with. His back is like, where's Waldo? You never know where it's going to pop up next. Men like Damon and Martell and other broken home creators and baby mama makers, in my opinion, and particularly in certain communities, are the biggest cause of poverty and socioeconomic decline. These men, many of whom can't afford to support one household, create a spattering of households that they refuse to contribute to in any significant way. They may visit the kids. They may pay a bill. They might even buy a pair of shoes. But they don't offer anything in the way of continuous and significant financial support, mostly because they themselves are professionally and economically underdeveloped in the first place. These are not necessarily lawyers and doctors running around impregnating a bunch of women. These are low-level men running around creating a low-level existence for any woman unfortunate enough to make their acquaintance. Now here's the thing. I'm putting the onus on the men for creating broken homes. But the women aren't innocent. Because as women, we've got to be discerning and stop giving away our cookies for a compliment and a text message. After all, it is the woman who's often left to raise the child, while the man is on to the next womb he can occupy. And I do mean rent and occupy, because he doesn't want it or her long term. Meanwhile, while she's tying up her womb and her joy entertaining a temporary renter, she is taking time away from someone who could be a permanent investor, a man who is going to invest in her and their children and their lives together and their future. But that's a story for another day. The question is, do y'all mind if we talk marriage and relationships? In addition to money? Can we also talk marriage and relationships over here? Let me know down in the comments below. In any case, as all three women suffer through and attempt to recover from Damon and the generational destruction he has left them to deal with, Damon has moved on to a new womb, a new young woman with no children, no quote-unquote baggage, and is doing so in a home he owns, courtesy of not having to pay regular child support for 7 children he made. I mean, he paid child support sometimes, when the various mamas caught him quote-unquote slipping, but it was never on a continuous basis. It was certainly never regular enough to afford them the opportunity to get their own financial lives in order, with the exception of Riley. The moms always had to stretch their limited resources across what was meant for 2 to do. Martellholt has done the same. Although Melody is able to financially provide for her children, she is left having to stretch her resources across what was meant for 2 to do. And she has to do this knowing that some of the resources that could have been provided to her children now have to be siphoned off, at least in part, to yet another child. Another child who will also only have a part of a father, and a part of his finances, and a part of his time and energy and efforts. These men and their creation of broken homes is the biggest threat to our community, to our society, and to the world as a whole. I would say we have to know and do better as women to recognize these deadbeats and not allow them into our lives. But sometimes they lie. as was the case with Riley. When Riley met Damon, he had not told her he had 5 children. She didn't learn that until she was already in love with him. And she only learned it by accident. He'd never actually told her. In my opinion, she should have left him then. But I also understand that she was in love with him, and her feelings were involved. So, let's talk about what the solution is. Because we've got to do something. We can't keep letting our communities be ravaged by men with no self-control, no penis control, and by women who are being bamboozled out of a life of peace, serenity, and financial empowerment for themselves and their children. Let me know what y'all think. Let's talk about it below. All right, y'all. That's it, and that's all. Hello there. If you like truth, you'll like it here. Welcome. If you don't, or if you believe in groupthink, or bullying others into believing the popular opinion, then this isn't the place for you. So go ahead and just cancel me now. On this channel, we don't discuss my truth or your truth. We discuss the truth, and no topic is off limits. So, log in, like, subscribe, get comfy, and comment. It's nice to have you here. So let's talk.